of spoken language. The first is in monologues when one speaker uses spoken language for any length of time, as in speeches, lecture, readings, news broadcasts, and the like. The hearer must process long stretches of speech without interruption. The stream of speech will go on whether or not the hearer comprehends. Planned monologues, such as speech and other pre-written material, usually manifest little redundancy and are therefore relatively difficult to comprehend. Unplanned monologues, impromptu lecture, and long stories in conversation, for example, exhibit more redundancy, which makes for ease in comprehension, but in the presence of more performance variable and other hesitant. See below can either help or hinder comprehension. Second, dialogues involve two or more speakers and can be subdivided into those exchanges that promote social relationship, interpersonal, and those for which the purpose is to convey propositional or factual information, transactional. And what makes listening difficult? Uh, the first one is clustering. What is it clustering? In written language, we are conditioned to attend to the sentence as the basic unit of organization in spoken language due to memory limitation and our predisposition for chunking or clustering. We break down speech into smaller groups of words. Second is redundancy. Redundancy spoken language, unlike most written language, has a good deal of redundancy. The next time you're in a conversation, notice the rephrasings, repetition, elaboration, and little insertion of "I mean" and "you know." Such redundancy helps the hearer to process meaning by offering more time and extra information. 3. Reduce forms. While spoken language does indeed contain a good deal of redundancy, it also has many reduced forms. Reduction can be phonological for "jetty" for "did you eat yet?", morphological syntaxis "when will you be back?", "tomorrow maybe", or pragmatic phone rings in house child answer and yells to another room in the house, "Mom, Pawn." This reduction poses significant difficulties, especially for classroom learners who might have initially been exposed to the full form of English language. Performance variable. Performance variable in spoken language, except for planned discourse, speech, lecture, hesitation, false starts, pause, and correction are common. Native listeners are conditioned for very young ages to without such performance variable, whereas they can easily interfere with comprehension in second language learners. Colloquial language. Colloquial language learners who have been exposed to standard written English and or text book language sometimes find it surprising and difficult to deal with colloquial language, idioms, slang, reduced form, and shared culture knowledge are all manifest at some point of conversation. Colloquialism appear in both monologues and dialogue. Rate of delivery. Rate of delivery virtually every language learner entirely thinks that native speakers speak to. Fast, actually, as Jack rejects. Used by a speaker is more critical to comprehension than share speakers. Stress, rhythm, and intonation. The prosodic features of the English language are very important for comprehension. Because English is a stress-themed language, English speech can be a terror for some learners, as mouthfuls of syllables come spilling out between stress points. The sentence, "The president is in elimination the air cargo," with four stressed syllables out 18 theoretically takes about the same amount of time. And the last is interaction. Interaction, unless a language learner's objective is exclusively to master some specialist skill like monitoring radio broadcasts or attending lectures. Interaction will play a large role in listening comprehension. Conversation is especially subject to all the rules of interaction, negotiation, clarification, attending signal, turn taking and topic nomination, maintenance, and termination. Types of classroom listening performance. The first is reactive. What is reactive? Sometimes you want a learner simply to listen to the surface structure of an utterance for the sole purpose of repetition it paid to you. While this kind of listening performance requires little meaningful processing, it never might be a legitimate, even though a minor aspect of an interactive, communicative classroom. The second is intensive. What is intensive? Techniques whose only purpose is to focus on components, word, intonation, discourse markers of discourse might be considered to be intensive and opposite to extensive in their requirement that students single out. Third is responsive. Responsive, a significant proportion of classroom listening activity consists of short stretches of teacher language designed to elicit immediate response. The student text in such listening is to process the teacher talk immediately and to fashion an impromptu reply. Example include asking question, "How are you today? What did you do last night?" Giving comment like, "Take a sheet of paper and a pencil." Seeking clarification like, "What was that word you said?" And checking comprehension like, "So how many people were in the elevator when the power went out?" Fourth is selective. What is selective? In longer stretches of discourse such as monologues of a couple of minutes or considerably longer, the task of the student is not to process everything that was said, but rather to scan the material selectively for certain information. Purpose of such performance is not to 100 for global of general meanings necessarily, but to be able to find important information in a field of potentially distressing information. 5. Extensive. What is extensive? Extensive, this is sort of a performance. Unlike the intensive processing described above, aims to develop a top-down global understanding of spoken language. Extensive performance could range for listening to lecture to listening to a conversation and deriving a comprehensive message or purpose. And the last is interactive. Interactive. Finally, there is a listening performance that can include all five of the above types. As learners actively participate in discussion, debates, conversation, role plays, and other peer and group work. Their listening performance must be integrally integrated with speaking and perhaps others. skills in the authentic give and take of communicative intelligence. Okay, the next slide will be next in my partner, Dhani Suryandono. Time is
Okay.
yours.
Okay, thank you, Naela. Principles for beginning listening techniques. Several decades, several decades of research and practice in teaching listening comprehension have yielded some practical principles for designing techniques that include oral comprehension. These principles are summarized below. Some of them, especially the first two, actually apply to any techniques. The others are more germane to listening. And number one, in an interactive four-skill curriculum, make sure that you don't overlook the importance of techniques that specifically develop listening comprehension competence. If your curriculum is strongly content-based or otherwise dedicated to the integration of skill, remember that each of the separate skill deserves special focus in appropriate doses. It's easy to adopt a philosophy of just letting students experience language without careful attention to component skills. Because oral comprehension itself cannot be overly observed. Teachers sometimes incorrectly assume that the input provided in the classroom will always be converted into intake. The creation of effective listening techniques requires studied attention to all the principles of listening already summarized in this chapter. And number two is use techniques that are intrinsically motivating. Appeal to listeners' personal interests and goals, since background information is an important factor in listening. Take into full account the experience, goals, and abilities of your student as you design lesson. Also remember that the cultural backgrounds of your students can be both facilitating and interfering in the process of listening. And then once a technique is launched, try to construct it in such a way that students are caught up in the activity and feel self-propelled toward its final outcome. Authentic language and real world Authentic language and real world tasks enable students to set the relevance of classroom activity to their long-term communicative goals. If you introduce natural text rather than consult artificial material, students will more readily dive into the activity. And number four, carefully consider the form of listener responses. Comprehension itself is not externally observable. We cannot peer into a learner's brain through a little window and empirically observe what is stored there after someone else has said something. We can only infer that certain things have been comprehended through students, offered or verbal or nonverbal response to speech. And number five, encourage the development of listening strategies. Most foreign language students are simply not aware of how to listen. One of your job is to equip them with listening strategies that extend beyond the classroom. And then number six, include the bo- include the include both bottom-up and top-down listening techniques. Speech processing theory distinguishes between two types of processing in both listening and reading comprehension. Bottom-up processing process from sound to words to grammatical relationship to lexical meaning, and H to a final message. And top-down process is effort from a bank of prior knowledge and global expectation, and other background information that the listener brings to the text.
Hello, Danny. Tell me if you need a next slide.
Okay, next slide is is for beginning level listener is bottom up exercise. And number one, have a call is discriminating between intonation contours in sentence. Listen to sequence of sentence pattern with satirizing of falling intonation. Place a check in column 1 or rising or column 2 failing, depending on the pattern you hear. And number 2 is call. Call discriminating between phonemes. Listen to pair of words. Some pairs differ in their final consonant, and some pairs are the same. Circle the word same or different depending on what you hear. And number three, call tujuan, so selective listening for morphological endings. Listen to series of sentence. Circle yes if the verb has an ed ending, and the circle no if it does not. Listen to a series. Yeah, sorry. Number four, call is selecting detail from the text or word recognition. Match a word that you hear with its picture. Listen to a weather report. Look at a list of words and circle the word that you hear. Listen to a sentence that contains clock time. Circle the clock time that you hear among the three choices. Listen to an advertisement, select the price of an item, and write the amount of a price tag. Yes. Number five, call is listening for normal sentence word order. Listen to a short dialogue and fill in the missing words that have been deleted in partial transcript. And then top 10 exercise. Goal is discriminating between emotional reaction. Listen to a sequence of utterance. Place a, place a check in the column that describes the emotional reaction that you hear. Interested, happy, surprised, or unhappy. Number 7, goal is getting the gist of a sentence. Listen to a sentence describing a picture and select the correct picture. And then interactive exercise. Goal is build a semantic network of word association. Listen to a word and associate all the related words that come to mind. Number 10, goals is recognize a familiar word and relate it to a category. Listen to words Listen to words from a shopping list and match its words that word to the store that sells it. And next slide. Naela, next slide. Uh, for for advanced level listeners, bottom up exercise. Number one is Number one goal is use feature of sentence stress and volume to identify important information for not taking. And then number two, goal is become aware of a sentence level features in lecture text. And then for top tones exercise is goal is okay. Goal is use the introduction to the lecture to predict its focus and direction. Listen to the introductory section of a lecture. Then read a number of topics on your answer sheet and choose the topic that best expresses what the lecture will discuss. And then to use the lecture transcript to predict the content of the next section. Read a section of lecture transcript. Stop reading at a juncture point and predict what will come next. Then read on to confirm your prediction. And then interactive exercise is use incoming detail to determine the accuracy of prediction about content. Listen to the introductory sentences to predict some of the main ideas you expect to hear in the lecture. Then listen to the lecture, not whether or not the instructor talk about the points you predicted. If does, not a detail about the point. Make a note a detail about the point. Determine Determine the main ideas of a section of lecture by analyze of the detail in that section. Listen to a section of lecture and take notes on the important details. Then relate the details to form an understanding of the main point of the section. Choose from a list of possible controlling ideas. I think it's enough for me. Back to Naila.
Okay, thank you very much, my partner Dhani Suryandono. And this is the last our present. And I'm sorry if there is any mistakes. And the last, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.